Senator John Marty is here now to talk a little bit about his attempt to repeal the constitutional amendment that would define marriage as a union between one man and one woman. Senator, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
First, let's talk about your legislation and how much traction do you think it can get?
Well, I think there are a whole lot of legislators, I actually think of both parties, who think what happened last year was a mistake in putting a constitutional amendment on the ballot to limit rights for other people. This would be the first time we've put a constitutional amendment on our state constitution that takes away rather than guarantees rights for people. And I don't know if it's going to get traction or not. Obviously, the majority passed the constitutional amendment last year. We'd need both houses to pass it. We partly want to make the point that, you know, you have a chance to undo a mistake before it goes further. We'd love to give the majority a chance to reconsider.
So you had just stated you're doing this kind of to make a point, and you'll see if there's some traction that is gained from it. So how do you get the message out there? If the bill does not move forward, then the constitutional amendment will be on the ballot this November. There's already, both sides are gearing up. It's going to be many, could be tens of millions of dollars spent on this thing. And I don't think that's in the interest of the public to spend all our time talking about that. We should talk about the bigger issues affecting the state. I've said all along, I don't think state government should be picking sides between various religious beliefs. I'm a Lutheran, Christian. My belief is that the God I believe in thinks that people should make lifelong commitments to each other. They should be able to choose their partner. You know, others who say they have the same religious belief come up with different conclusions, but government should not be discriminating and writing into laws certain religious beliefs over others, and therefore the constitutional guarantees ought to be to everybody. Senator Limmer states that he believes this should go to the voters and let the voters decide, and he has confidence in Minnesota voters to decide what they think is right. So why not?
I don't think human rights should ever be up for somebody else's vote. I mean, 40 years ago, you put voting rights for interracial marriages, overwhelmingly rejected. Lots of states constitutionally prohibited that. It took the U.S. Supreme Court to say that it's unfair discrimination. 40 years later, the opponents of that have come around to see, you know, that's not fair, that's not right. But, you know, we had constitutions banning people from opposite races, different races, from marrying each other. I think if Minnesota were to pass this constitutional amendment, we would be the last state to do so. And I will guarantee you that 10 years from now, it'll be the same thing as happened the only time the federal government had an amendment to its constitution taking away people's rights, prohibition. 13 years later, it was repealed. This one will be repealed too, but I just don't think Minnesota wants to be known as one that's taking away the rights of its own people.
All right, Senator, we're going to shift gears to Representative Cornish's legislation, which would essentially allow prosecutors to carry a gun in a courthouse. And it would also enhance penalties for those who do harm a prosecuting attorney, bringing it up to the same level as, say, if you harm a police officer. What do you think of his legislation?
Well, first of all, the second portion of it, increasing the penalties, yeah, prosecutors are vulnerable in the same way law enforcement people are. They're seen, in theory, I guess it is, that the person they're prosecuting doesn't want them to be prosecuted, just like they don't like the police to catch them and so on. And they may be at higher risk and therefore enhanced penalties because it relates to their job. I think that's appropriate. And I don't expect that there'd be I think a lot of people see it similar, their role is similar to law enforcement person in terms of the risk. So I think that would be something that's likely to be supported by people across the board. The idea, the second portion of it, that they should be able to carry guns, first of all, I don't think that's going to change anything in the courtroom because I think the judges are going to say no. And I think it's not going to change anything in the courtroom. It may change it somewhere else in the courthouse setting. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of the idea that more people carrying more guns is going to make our communities more safe. To me, you know, maybe it is something that's appropriate. Again, I think it's misrepresented if it's suggesting they're going to be carrying guns in the courtrooms, because I think the judges aren't going to say that's okay.
What do you think of the bigger picture, security with courthouses and courtrooms? What would you suggest to tighten it, if you even think that it needs to be tightened?
Well, I think we should certainly be looking at it. Same thing at the state capitol here. I mean, you go down to any big bank or office building downtown Minneapolis or St. Paul, any of the office buildings, you have security there. You have to sign in, you have to get a badge, you have to have somebody come and meet you, all that sort of thing. Here in the state capitol, we want to have much more open, but there are no metal detectors here, unlike the Hennepin and Ramsey County courthouses, no metal detectors, nothing of that sort, just open access in effect. And I think that, you know, it's not good to just wait until something tragic happens, like happened up in Lake County. I don't think we want to wait for things to happen, and I think reviewing the security at courthouses and reviewing the security at like state capitol, I think that's very important that we do that. And it's a touchy issue to talk about because it can be very expensive to deal with this security. But on the other hand, it's a tough issue to balance. But I think we have to take a second look at courthouses in the state capitol.
And so do you think Representative Cornish's legislation, if nothing else, opens up this conversation a bit?
That's very important. The more we can talk about these things, the better off it is. But I think, you know, it's an ugly situation we're in right now where you have potentially violent people doing things to prosecutors, to public officials across the board. I don't think we should live our lives in fear of it, but on the other hand, it is an issue that deserves discussion, and I'm glad it is being discussed.
Okay, Senator, we have time for one last question, and I want to touch on Senator Limmer's bill, which would enhance the penalties of neglecting or abusing vulnerable adults, bringing it up to par with perhaps a felony, depending on the level of abuse. Exactly. Now, there are some concerns by providers that it goes a bit too far. What are your thoughts?
I haven't heard all the concerns of the providers yet, but I think it is appropriate. I mean, you have to realize when you've got somebody who may not, very vulnerable older adult, usually older adult, or a person with a severe disability who cannot retaliate, cannot respond, cannot fight back, cannot notify somebody else if their caregiver is abusing them. And every now and then you hear a story in a nursing home or something of just horrendous abuse. Yes, I think it does deserve very serious penalties. I think it's important to hear what the providers are saying just to make sure it's being done in a fair way that doesn't mess up the way things work. But number one, our concern has to be for the most vulnerable people and seniors, people with severe disabilities who cannot fight back, cannot even alert others to the problem. In many cases, are extremely vulnerable. So I think it's worth doing something with.
Senator Marty, thanks for your thoughts on all of these issues. We certainly appreciate your time.
My pleasure.